who is a Democratic National Committee member, former chair of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party, former executive director. You've been involved in party politics for a very long time. Thank you so much for being here, Juan.
Well, Laura, thanks for having me. I know the role of party chair is not an easy one. I just want to thank you for your service, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm grateful for you to be here, and you are one of the people that recruited me, so sometimes I'm like, dang you. No, I'm just kidding. So, Juan, tell us, what is the Democratic National Committee for people who don't know?
Yeah, the Democratic National Committee is the national organization of the Democratic Party. And from there, you have state Democratic parties and then local Democratic parties, usually by county. And that's the party structure per se. But I think a lot of people have misconceptions on what the DNC, as it's normally called, actually does, or the powers that they have. Their main responsibility is to build the infrastructure necessary to win elections.
Right.
And so that is mobilizing an electoral program, mobilizing volunteers. They don't dictate what candidates do or say, or what elected officials do or say. They mostly build out the infrastructure, and that is what state parties and local parties are also responsible for.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, one of the things that I hear a lot from voters, Democratic voters, non-party affiliated voters, is that they are frustrated with the Democratic Party. And one of the things that I try to say is, what is the Democratic Party? There's a lot involved in what the Democratic Party is. One is what you mentioned, the apparatus, party apparatus, starting at the DNC, the state level, and the county level. But the Democratic Party is also, like you mentioned, the candidates, the elected officials, and registered Democrats.
Yeah.
And we all make up this party.
There's actually an interesting book that I would recommend you read, and the viewers that are watching read. It's called Hollow Parties, and it talks about both the history of political parties in this country, and also what the party apparatus kind of looks like. They actually refer to it as the party blob, because there is no one singular political party. It's not a hierarchical, top-down kind of power structure. You have the political parties that get all of the blame, and Democratic Party is polling, I think, at the lowest levels, despite November's victory, still polling at the lowest levels of favorability than, I think, in my lifetime. But the party blob also constitutes consultants and outside groups, candidates, podcasters, influential, other influencer types that set not even direction, but set are part of the conversation around what is the Democratic Party. And that last portion of groups, the podcasters, influencer types, is a more recent phenomenon, but you have people like the Pod Save America folks and the other kind of YouTubers that are starting to interject themselves into the national conversations around what the Democratic Party brand should be or is, what our candidates should do. And so it's not a very coordinated system. And I'll say that on the Republican side, it's a little more coordinated, but still the power structure is become more amorphous over the last 30 years, especially since Citizens United have created pathways for money to flow to a lot of outside groups and outside entities. And so there is it's funny you asked, what is the Democratic Party? Because I recently had a friend ask me, they were trying to recruit someone to run for a position, and she said, will the party get behind her? And I was like, what do you mean by that? What is the party? Which is your exact question. What do you, when people say, what is the Democratic Party, what are they referring to?
Right. So. Well, and I think people also don't understand that, we have part of our governing structure, right? We have our bylaws. We have the national bylaws, state bylaws, and of course the local bylaws. And people don't understand that we can't tip the scales in favor of one candidate over another when we have two candidates in the same race, with some limited exceptions. And we also can't stop somebody from running. So people are like, well, why do we have this candidate? And like, I have no control over that. Nobody has any control over that. If somebody is a Democrat and they run as a Democrat, they get to run as a Democrat. And in some states where there's more political power, I think there's a little bit more of a way to I don't know, funnel people in certain positions. But certainly here in Florida, we really don't have a lot of power or control to stop someone from running or to, elevate a particular candidate when there's more than one.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I have been looking at how other states structure their bylaws, and they do have more, I would say, power over who gets to be a nominee running under the Democratic Party brand. Now, people have to remember that political parties are not government organizations. They're private entities that can govern themselves. And there are states like Colorado, Utah, New York, Minnesota, to some respects, that have a process where like they have either a state convention or county caucuses where you have to get a certain number. It's a small threshold, like 15% of caucus goers, which is any Democratic Party member that goes to this, in order to qualify to be on the ballot as a Democratic candidate. There are other ways. If you don't make it on that, there's other ways to get on the ballot by petitioning, but they don't make it as easy as Florida to just write a check and say like, now I'm a candidate for the Democratic nomination, which is an interesting way to do it because it does give, party members another reason to be more involved. Because the way, I think if you're an activist trying to make some sort of positive change in like your local politics, political parties should be a way to do that. But often, I think they don't have enough. We're treated just as volunteers, like just get out the vote volunteers,
right? Rather
than people trying to really influence the political direction of how their community or their state wants to go, and so I think the problems there are very like structural. They're embedded within like how the rules are governed, and sometimes how state laws are put in place, but it has, I think, a very detrimental effect on giving people agency. And I think this is going to a larger point that I want to make about people don't feel represented right now,
right?
By either party. The people that were Democrats that no longer feel represented left the party. People that, the same with Republicans that have left the party, a growing number of NPAs. Now, some of that you could say is because, I think the punditry will say, well, there's both parties have gone too far to the extremes. But I think it's more about they don't feel like their issues are being represented. Whether it's not, so to me, it's not like a left-right dichotomy. It's just like they're not listening to me.
Right.
And anyway, so I'm digressing from your questions, but
no, that's fine.
But it is a problem.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up a lot in this podcast. Actually, is really how individuals feel disempowered, whether it be by just not just the party system itself, but just like on elections. People are just in general feel disempowered, and I think that they feel that their voice doesn't matter, that maybe their vote doesn't matter. As you mentioned, we're seeing both political parties, at least here in Florida, almost bleed support from registered Democrats or registered Republicans to being non-party affiliated or independent, as you will. And to your point, yeah, we have the lowest favorability in our lifetime, and it's an issue that we're trying to resolve. Like, how do we get people to believe in the Democratic Party again, on one hand, but really what we're talking about is how do we make the Democratic Party something that people want to believe in and want to be part of and feel that their voice is heard within that structure?
There is an interview that I recommend your viewers listen to with that Jon Stewart did with Ken Martin. Now, Ken Martin is the new chair of the Democratic National Committee. He was elected in January of this year, and it was really interesting to watch. Ken is someone who's like a true organizer, comes from Minnesota, from the Paul Wellstone School of Organizing, and he is someone that will tell it to you straight. That was what's so fascinating about that exchange, is because Ken wasn't trying to spin this conversation. He was just trying to articulate the reality, and the gist of it was John was asking Ken, like, what do political parties do? This is the exact question that you posed. And what Ken said is like, well, they build infrastructure. And what John's response was, infrastructure to do what? Like, what are you building infrastructure to do? Like, how are you winning back voters?
Right.
And, the interview goes on for about an hour, and the exchange is really interesting. I think Ken was trying to frame it as like, we're Democratic Party is fighting for the working class, give everyone an opportunity to succeed. And like the normal things you hear, right? And what John called out was like, yes, those are things that I think everyone agrees on, but it almost feels like platitudes. Like, what are the exact proposals you're proposing to win back voters? Like to feel like to alleviate the pain that they're feeling. And what's revealing about that is that Ken, our DNC chair, the person at the top of our entire political infrastructure within the party. It's like, look, I don't control the candidates or the elected officials. We can create a framework within the party of like how issues fit into it, but at the end of the day, it's the elected officials that push those proposals forward, and our job is to support them. And so, in that, I think there is a big failure that we are not able to define ourselves as a party, or like specific policy proposals that we're pushing, that we are dependent just on these elected officials to put forward a policy that we then are expected to support. So there is that, I think it's just a systemic failure, and it's a very revealing conversation. I think it speaks to the tensions that I feel as a party, someone that's really involved in the party, and wanting to win back voters, wanting to like not just win back voters, but like actually do something to resolve some of these issues, but feeling powerless, like within the party structure, even as a DNC member.
Right. I mean, I get that a lot as well. I mean, I hear all the time, well, does the Democratic Party support this, or are you going to support that? Whatever, even locally, when we have, various things that arise, like what do we support? And I always go back to the fact that we have our Democratic Party platform, right? We have our platform. Yeah. In the Miami-Dade Democratic Party, our bylaws start with our values, like base level values. But it is hard to adopt a particular policy position because that requires a resolution and a vote, and it's hard to know what we should or can be addressing, especially with a lack of involvement, just generally. So we have, I think it's like a vicious cycle of no involvement, and then no like mechanism by which voices are heard that would make people want to get involved. So it continues to like downwardly spiral.
Yeah. I think there is an opportunity perhaps at a local level to push for some sort of policy positions, but going back, you mentioned the platform. It's interesting because every presidential year we approve a platform at the convention. I don't think any of our elected officials particularly care what's in it, and I'm being completely truthful. It is a document that is approved at the convention, and when I say elected officials don't particularly care, there's no enforcement mechanism for them to care, it is, I would say, even more so undermined because in an era where you have the Democratic Party with such such low favorability, you actually get bonus points as a candidate to say I'm not beholden to the Democratic Party. I won't agree with them on everything. these like just like these broad statements that don't really actually pinpoint like what that candidate actually believes in, other than like, well, distancing themselves away from the party. And so what good is a platform if you can't actually hold your candidates and elected officials to it?
Right.
And so again, another structural issue that I think people have, and when I say like there's an opportunity at a local level, is I do think that there are certain things that we could do to just issues that are important to Miami. It could be as, not to get into the weeds on that because that's not what this conversation's about, but like I think when I was executive director and our chair was Annette Tadeo, we took a position on the Dolphins stadium deal. There was a big county tax giveaway to Stephen Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, and we took a position even though there were Democratic county commissioners who were voting for it. And we thought it was important because we needed to show that the party wasn't for taxpayer giveaways to billionaires. And similarly, that was back in 2013. Similarly, when I was chair, we took a position, that had a national connection, but like against Mayor Jimenez's cooperating with ICE on detainer requests to deport people in our community. And so there are things that we can do locally to signal like where our values stand in very specific policies that we can do. Now that's not going to cut through the noise of like the national conversation, like what the brand is of the Democratic Party nationally, but I do think it helps at the margins kind of define what we stand for locally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that we've been able, I think there's certain things that are well within our values that I think are non-controversial that we are able to espouse. So for example, you mentioned the ICE cooperation agreements. We have made a strong support of immigrant communities and fighting back against these 287G agreements, elevating our elected officials like South Miami Mayor Javier Fernandez's litigation about 287G agreements. Also things like reproductive rights, reproductive freedom. Those are things that are not controversial within the Democratic Party. They're things that we all stand for and that we support. And that although there's a continuum on that, it's not all one way. But also things like we were able to do a vote in our last meeting about some of the charter amendments for City of Miami and voting to support, for example, term limits and redistricting. So there's a way, but we have to fight through the kind of the almost like the bureaucracy of the apparatus to do that in many cases.
And now that's great, and that's things that we need to do, like taking local position fights. But I would also add the most politically smart thing to do is not always avoid the controversy. Sometimes there's a controversy for a reason. And I'll give you an example, which was very controversial at the time, but when I was chair, we took on, our state attorney, which is a very powerful Democrat, Kathy Fernandez-Rundle, refused to prosecute correctional officers that had killed an inmate in a hot scalding shower. His name is Darren Rainey. We worked with local groups to hold her to account and actually ended up censuring her and asking her to step down because of not just that failure, but other previous failures to not hold correctional officers or law enforcement officers to account. And so that was deeply controversial, but also rooted in values. And I think if you you do kind of need to sit in the controversy sometimes to show the public where you stand, and but it's not easy.
It's not easy, but I think that you're right. There's been failure, for lack of a better word, for candidates. Yeah. The party itself, in many cases, or the local party or state party, to be more firm about what our values are and where we stand on issues. And a lot of what I've heard, and I imagine that you've heard this as well, voters feel like the Democratic Party doesn't represent them, and that we are not shooting straight, that we are wishy-washy, that we are, and that when you don't take a stand, it's hard for people to trust you because they don't know where you stand on a particular position. And I think, we have to, like you said, not sit out controversies. This is what we do. This is the political process. It's all how do we allocate resources? What are our values? What do we stand for? And what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. That reminded me of, as you were saying that, and this might be controversial, which is a good theme. Let's lean into it. That, if you were to ask, like, what is the Democratic Party's strategy? It's like, we have the big tent strategy.
Right.
And to me, that feels like like a very pragmatic, short-term solution to capturing back power, which the Big Tent meaning like allowing Democrats to adopt different positions based on where they're running, right? But it's I think, a very bad long-term strategy to define who we are as a party and what our values really are. And I think a lot of that is catching up to us because we've been the Big Tent strategy for a while. And in that interview I referenced earlier, actually, Ken Martin said, put 100 Democrats in a room and you're going to get 150 different opinions of what the Democratic Party stands for. Mm-hmm. And therein lies a huge problem, right? And I think part of it is rooted in this like Big Tent strategy of like, we'll just let, pro-choice candidates run, and like if you're not into that, then that's fine as long as you're like against Trump and caucusing with the Democrats. And so it does feel people wanting more, right? And like I've got a young family, I've got 2 kids, a third on the way, and like I'm really concerned about the lack of sensible gun regulations in schools.
Right.
And that's something that I would love to be more, take more time to organize around and like educate and like let's work together to do things like putting background checks on private sales of guns or other things to curb like those with just like just expand what we have currently it is a huge concern, I think. And so, but if the Democratic Party also allows like congressional members that don't share those positions, then what am I actually organizing within the party? And that's why some of these outside groups that are single issue groups then become a better vehicle for activists that are really like focused on a singular issue. Well, the party's allowing these like people I don't trust to be elected officials. Maybe I'll go organize with Moms Demand Action.
Right.
Right. And similar issues, single issue advocacy groups on a wide variety of things.
Which further reduces Democratic Party power when it's these other organizations that are taking the lead in these very important issues.
Yeah, I mean, and then that goes to the next problem, right? The next problem is like about how, since Citizens United, one important lever the party had to set direction, keep people in line with like was they controlled a lot of like the donors and the money. But since then, it's every rich donor has their own foundation and their own ability to get money into different projects that they want to do outside the party.
Right.
And that has, again, hollowed out in large part political parties, because you do have a lot of, now while you kind of are going toward in the same direction, a lot of competing strategies, a lot of duplicative effort.
Yes.
And you end up with parties that are completely underfunded, that don't have year-round staff like some of these outside groups do, but then have all of the accountability laid on the party,
Right.
while a lot of the outside groups don't, right? They sure they report to the funders and annual reports and things like that, but they don't have that kind of outside scrutiny and that political parties do. And so but at the same time, we got to work together. This is just like the world we live in, right? And so, but just the reality that the political parties don't have like this immense amount of power that people think they have, but it is still an important piece of the political landscape because we carry the brand.
Right.
Like every candidate is running under the Democratic Party brand. So if their favorability is at an all-time low, something's wrong, and instead of trying to we got to fund that and help fix it.
Right.
And and then the other piece is we do have the volunteer infrastructure. Year in, year out, it doesn't matter if a funder decides to not write a check this time, we can't fold. We just get new people in place and then we grind it out, right? Yeah. And so it carries that volunteer infrastructure from year to year to year, and that's why that work is so important. But yeah, there's something broken in our political ecosystem.
Fundamentally,
it's misaligned with where money flows, who has political power, and I would argue that because political parties have so much less of it, it actually disempowers grassroots activists. If you're a grassroots person wanting to make a change in your community, if you could organize through a party, and if that party had more influence and power, it would give you more agency.
Right.
But it doesn't. So.
Not yet. We're working on it. But what are some things that we can do right now, locally, that you believe that we can start to win back voters? Because there is this narrative that Miami-Dade County, there's more Republicans now than Democratic voters, and we see again the increase in non-party affiliated voters, and that's something that deeply concerns me. What would you say is your top thought about how we strengthen the Democratic brand, especially here in Miami-Dade County?
I think there's a short term and a long term. Short term, we have to win elections. We got important runoff elections coming in just a few weeks.
December 9th.
Yeah, we got to win them, and we have to take on some important fights. I think that should be a group discussion with other party members and leaders, but we have to pick fights that we're willing to could be controversial, but that align with our values and just stand firm in that. And that might take organizing. It might take some difficult conversations, but we do have to pick some fights to show that we're not just asking people for their vote, but we're willing to fight for them and make a difference. The whole land grab of Miami-Dade College next to the Freedom Tower, giving it to the Trump Library, that is something that is
despicable. I mean, and just corrupt.
The worst kind of corruption and grift.
Yeah.
And a direct attack to our community's identity, in my opinion. And so, that's an example. I mean, there's many examples, but taking on corruption and grift. Corruption has no political party, so that can sometimes get controversial. But I think it's important for people to know where we stand as a party. And then long term, I do think that we have to go to a multi-party. This might be more controversial. I do think we need to go to a multi-party system. And let me explain why. I think people are telling us they don't feel represented by either party. You can see that in the registration numbers. NPAs are far outpacing as far as new registrants go, far outpacing Democrats and Republicans. And I think that if you not, and it's not just a Democratic Party thing. If you look at the Democratic Party, we're probably 3 different political parties, and same with the Republicans. I mean, you just saw Marjorie Taylor Greene resigning from Congress because she had a dispute with Trump. and you got people that are like the Nick Fuentes part of the Republican Party and the Steve Bannon types and the Mitt Romney types. So they don't all get along, and so like they would probably be 3 or 4 different political parties. But the way our electoral system is set up right now, it is just to the 2 parties, and it's going back and forth and back and forth, and every time the stakes feel higher. Like we're getting so much more divided, and what the result of that is that issues that the wide majority of Americans agree on, whether it's taking on prescription drugs, fixing our healthcare system, education, like those get either ignored or just like go in the opposite direction because of this fierce partisanship. And I think one of the ways to fix that is to move to a multi-party system, whether it's proportional representation, but it moves us away, because like the way we're going, just this back and forth, let's say Democrats regain power of Congress in 26, it's still going to be like the long-term trends are not good, I think, for this country. So if we are serious as a Democratic Party about saving democracy, then we really have to think about how we make people feel represented in that democracy, and that people have more than 2 options to choose from. And so there are actually some states that are thinking about moving to proportional representation for their state legislatures. I think Michigan might be one. There are other things beyond proportional representation, like ranked choice voting, that some other states are considering, that allow for different political parties to organize themselves and to thrive. So I think that is one of the major issues at the crux of the problems we're seeing in this country right now. And it would end a lot of the political gamesmanship that you have. Gerrymandering wouldn't be an issue if you had a proportional representation. Neither would, again, like a lot of these policy proposals that have 70% support, 80% support of people. You could find coalitions within multi political parties to get some of this stuff passed. So it sounds pie in the sky, but I honestly don't think it is, because we're going to reach a kind of a breaking point, in my opinion, with like how people do not feel represented right now, that that we're just going to be left with fewer and fewer choices. So that is my long-term idea.
Well, I know we're out of time, but I have just a brief little story about that, because I lived in San Francisco that has more of a, at least on the local level, different parties that are represented, or at least it was back when I lived there. And we had, a Green Party candidate, for example. Matt Gonzalez ran for mayor against Gavin Newsom back in 2004. Matt Gonzalez is actually from McAllen, Texas, where I'm from. He was a public defender. Don't know where he's at now, but he talked about this issue of how do third parties break through. And given that it requires structural reforms and statutory reforms, his suggestion was starting on the local level. This is the easiest way, especially in these nonpartisan races. This is where we can have third party candidates actually show up and start to build something different. But, I doubt very seriously that our Republican supermajority is going to be anywhere looking for, more democracy in Florida anytime soon.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Juan. Any final remarks?
No, thanks for having me. I think if you are interested in making a change, I do, despite political parties having a few, not as much power as they should, it's still an important institution to invest time in, to build that infrastructure, and to try to get your ideas in the political ecosystem.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great day. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.